Opening up the diagonals for the queen and king's bishop immediately asserts central presence. Mirroring white's central thrust immediately contests the king's pawn territory, establishing a symmetrical pawn structure ripe for tactical skirmishes. Developing a knight to challenge, the central pawn immediately intensifies the opening's fight for territory. A common and solid response, this develops a knight and defends the pawn, preparing for further central expansion. Opening the Spanish game, this bishop targets the knight's connection to its king, creating immediate positional pressure and a subtle threat. Challenging the bishop's position, this pawn advance aims to disrupt white's developing harmony and potentially gain space on the queen side. Eliminating the knight trades off black's central pawn majority, potentially weakening their queenside structure for the coming middle game struggle. Opening the d-file for your queen and bishop offers exciting counterplay, but leaves your king's pawn shield vulnerable. Securing the king allows for future attacking ideas. Opening the e-file for white's rook creates immediate attacking prospects on the king side. Seizing the initiative, this pawn thrust immediately challenges black's central structure and opens lines, preparing to exploit the weakened dark squares around the isolated c6 pawn. Activating the bishop to f6 sets up a pin and eyes the central pawn, aiming to disrupt white's d4 pawn and potentially gain an open file later. Solidifying the center and preparing to advance the queen's pawn creates a robust pawn chain, restricting black's active piece play and gaining valuable space for white's pieces to maneuver. Freeing the d-file creates immediate central dynamism, opening avenues for your rook while potentially inviting a pawn race. However, it also exposes your king's shield and grants white greater central dominion if unaddressed with precise counterplay. Reclaiming the center pawn creates a robust pawn chain and opens the c-file, offering future pressure against black's isolated c-pawn and potentially on the queen side. Developing the queen to d7 aims to bolster the central pawn structure and prepare for potential queenside castling or even a direct assault on white's d4 pawn, though it does leave the queen somewhat exposed on the open d-file and obstructs the c8 bishop's development for the moment. Challenging the bishop's presence directly is a sound strategic choice, forcing black to address the potential piece exchange and its implications for central control. Relinquishing control of the crucial d4 square, black seeks to consolidate their position, yet this retreat allows white to prepare a formidable pawn chain while opening lines for their pieces. The bishop, having been displaced from its active diagonal, now eyes the undeveloped queenside, a passive aspiration given white's central dominance. This piece repositioning, while understandable, sacrifices immediate dynamism for a speculative defense. Re-establishing central control and preparing for knight development, this squares away the knight's position and opens up possibilities for further central pawn advances or piece play, while also implicitly challenging black's somewhat passive development on the queen side. The castling kingside for black now exposes their monarch to a perilous diagonal, especially with white's bishop already poised on b5 and the knights on f3 and c3 ready to advance, creating a potent attacking force. Befriending the bishop to f4 immediately intensifies the pressure along the a7-g1 diagonal, subtly probing black's defensive network and preparing for potential outpost gains on the queen side. Introducing the knight to e7 immediately prepares it for potential redeployment to g6, aiming to bolster the defense of the castled king and potentially initiate counterplay on the king side, while also clearing the f8 square for the rook. Seizing the open c-file, white initiates a potent central clamp, preparing to challenge black's doubled pawns and establish dominance over this crucial vertical corridor. Repositioning the knight to g6 immediately contests white's bishop on f4 and simultaneously prepares to defend the king side. Securing the bishop on the long diagonal, this maneuver aims to leverage the potential pressure on black's queenside pawn structure, while simultaneously preparing for potential pawn advances like b4 to expand white's space and restrict black's pieces. Shifting the bishop to the queen side opens up lines for black's rooks and aims to challenge white's control of the d4 square, potentially creating counterplay against the isolated pawns. The knight's sidestep to the rim is a provocative maneuver, aiming to disrupt black's solid pawn structure and potentially exploit the now exposed c2 square. This daring repositioning opens up a path for the knight to infiltrate on the queen side, perhaps targeting the weak pawns or creating tactical skirmishes. It's a bold gambit, sacrificing immediate central influence for a more active, albeit unconventional, role in the ensuing battle. Sacrificing the bishop offers a potential path to opening lines for black's rooks, but it comes at the steep price of relinquishing the initiative and creating potential weaknesses around the king, especially if white's knight can effectively infiltrate the newly opened d4 square, or if white's queen can find an avenue to attack the exposed monarch. Opening the f-file for your rook and activating your king's pawn structure is the immediate consequence of this recapture, setting the stage for potential dynamic play down the semi-open column while simultaneously solidifying the center and preparing for a queenside initiative. Consolidating the king on the b-file, a shrewd precaution, shields it from the potent diagonal of the now active bishop and denies white any immediate tactical inroads. The knight hops to c5, injecting immediate tension into the center and aiming a pointed finger at black's queenside defenses. This aggressive positioning pressures the pawn chain, potentially disrupting black's carefully constructed, albeit somewhat compromised, pawn structure that arose from the doubled c-pawns. White is clearly seeking to exploit any awkwardness in black's piece placement, particularly the misplaced knight on g6, and might be preparing a subtle squeeze or even a tactical shot if black isn't attentive. The move also subtly opens avenues for other pieces, hinting at a more dynamic continuation than the seemingly solid setup might suggest. Relocating the queen to d6 establishes a firmer grip on the d4 pawn while simultaneously preparing for potential queenside expansion with the pending moves of the b-pawn. Unleashing a queen's long-range threat, this maneuver immediately forces black to address the looming danger on the queenside, potentially disrupting their developing piece harmony and creating immediate tactical possibilities. Seeking refuge from the storm gathering on the queenside, the black king scurries away from the active white queen and bishop, aiming to find a more stable footing near the b8 square. Exploiting black's exposed king, white seizes the initiative with a swift knight sortie, aiming to disrupt the pawn structure and open lines for attack. A bold gamble, sacrificing a bishop to expose the king's immediate surroundings and disrupt white's coordination, though it potentially leaves black vulnerable to a swift counterattack if white can navigate the ensuing complications. Unleashing a bold pawn thrust, white immediately challenges black's vulnerable queen and centralizes the e-pawn, aiming to disrupt the black king's already precarious position and seize initiative by creating further complications. A bold gambit sacrificing a knight for a desperate attack on white's uncastled king, hoping to exploit the open files. The doubled pawns on the c-file, a consequence of black's earlier capture, now face a direct assault as white liberates their queen to pry open lines and exploit the compromised queenside. A bold reintroduction of material, 20. FXC5** courageously accepts the pawn exchange, aiming to revitalize black's pawn structure and open the f-file for potential counterplay. This tactical gamble seeks to disrupt white's centralized pawn mass and create immediate attacking possibilities against the white king, now with an exposed f-file. While it does leave the kingside pawns somewhat fractured, the immediate liberation of the e-file and the queen's re-engagement offer dynamic compensation for the structural concessions. The knight's aggressive leap into the center, forking the king and a rook, immediately disrupts black's king's safety and forces a decision, potentially liberating the rook on the file for future offensive operations. Reining in the king's potential exposure, a sensible repositioning to a more secure square, preventing the immediate check and creating a slight respite from the relentless knight's pressure. Opening the g-file with this pawn capture, white relentlessly targets the compromised black kingside structure, creating immediate diagonal threats and aiming to disrupt black's king's precarious sanctuary. Black advances the pawn, creating a fascinating pawn structure and opening avenues for the queen, even as the doubled pawns on the c-file offer potential targets. A daring gambit emerges, sacrificing material to fracture black's defenses and seize the initiative. Repositioning the queen to a more active square, 23. Key 7 asterisk prepares to contest the open e-file and potentially launch counterplay against white's exposed king, while simultaneously defending the e4 pawn, which white now attacks. Securing the open c-file offers a vital avenue for your rook, preparing to pressure the uncastled black king and coordinate with the queen for potential breakthroughs. A bold attempt to gain queenside space, simultaneously threatening the white knight on a4, but it potentially weakens the b-pawn's shelter and might invite further penetration along the c-file if white can consolidate. Shifting the queen to c2 aims to galvanize the remaining queenside pawns and prepare for a potential central breakthrough, while simultaneously defending against any immediate tactical incursions by black's knight or bishop.